This is a review of the Fitbit Sense smartwatch as well as fitness tracker. And I chose the Fitbit Sense because I was coming off of a Charge 3 that actually had its screen fail completely randomly, which obviously isn't a good thing to want to buy from that brand again. But I really enjoyed the app and the overall amount of information that it gave me, so I was willing to give Fitbit a second chance. And also, as someone who owns an Android smartphone, the Apple Watch is really a non-option because if you don't have an iPhone, you basically can't use the Apple Watch. So thank you, Apple, for that. But that's what led me down this particular path. And when it comes down to the cost of the Fitbit Sense, it's a $329.95 smartwatch, at least at the time that I recorded this video. So it is Fitbit's essentially flagship option. It's their most premium smartwatch that they have access to. And it's also fairly expensive in comparison to other smartwatches and fitness trackers that exist. Although comparing it to something like the Apple Watch, certainly not the most expensive. And also, I will link this smartwatch in the description of this video if you want to check it out on Amazon. I'll also link a couple other devices that I'll be talking about in this video there as well, so feel free to check those out should you want to while you watch this. So first things first, if you look at my wrist, you will notice that I do not have a Fitbit Sense on, but I have a Fitbit Charge 4 on. And that's because I returned my Fitbit Sense. So I'll talk about why I decided to return mine, essentially what made me make that decision, and then hopefully talk through some considerations to see if it's something that seems like a better fit for you or if you might want to look for a different device. So overall, I think the build quality and overall fit and finish of the Sense was really excellent. It does remind me of an Apple Watch in many ways, although I do think it has a slightly more childlike appearance. And I say that mostly because of the overall types of bands they offer, although they do offer some higher end leather bands, for example, if you're willing to pay quite a premium to get those. So you can dress this watch up if you want to. I just think in comparison to the Samsung Galaxy watches or the Apple Watch, those just have a little bit more professional demeanor to them, but not the biggest deal, just something to be somewhat mindful of. But on the plus sides, the Fitbit Sense is an extremely light watch, so it's very comfortable to wear both during the day, while you're working out, and also at night while you sleep. So I had it on pretty much 24/7 for the few weeks that I owned it, and no problems there at all. Also, it is water resistant up to 50 meters, so unless you're doing some deep sea diving, that should be totally fine for whatever you're up to. And I think one of the biggest positive features of the Sense is it has a 6+ day battery life. Comparing that to the 18 hours of the Apple Watch, there really is no comparison there. I don't think 18 hours is anywhere near long enough for a fitness tracker and smartwatch. So when it comes to the Sense, you can have no problem wearing that the entire day, basically waking up, putting it on the charger while you take a shower and get ready in the morning. By the time you pull it off, it should be totally good to go. So I think that's absolutely perfect on Fitbit's part and the way that pretty much all smartwatches should be, in my opinion. Past that, it has an excellent screen. So it's an AMOLED screen, and the screen is covered by Corning Gorilla Glass. So it should hold up to quite a few bumps and bruises if you accidentally drop it, for example. Although it's certainly not designed to resist everything, so do be a bit careful if you, for example, wear it in the gym and are using heavy weights around it. Just to cover a few of the non-health features fairly quickly, so it does have a ton of different watch faces that you can flip out and adjust to. When it comes to the slightly childlike design though, I do think that applies even more so to their watch face selection. So there are watch faces that Fitbit designs and offers. They also have a marketplace where you can check out some watch faces that people sell usually for about $2 a piece, at least that's what I remember seeing. But it's kind of hard to find ones that have a more minimalistic flair, especially if you want a minimalistic display that also still, for example, shows your heart rate. When you're thinking about a watch that you might wear in a professional setting, I don't want necessarily a bunch of bright colors or a ton of statistics all over the watch at all times if I ever check it. So I do wish they had some more professional options. I do think Apple is absolutely exceptional in that particular area. And also something that I think will be a fairly big deal to a lot of people, at least it is to me, is music. So the biggest disappointment when it comes to music is the Fitbit Sense does not allow you to actually stream and or download and play anything from Spotify. The Fitbit Sense does have a Spotify app, but it's strictly like a remote control to play or pause or skip forward. You need a device nearby that's actually playing the music in question. So when it comes to my needs, I want something I can play in the gym when I'm working out without needing to bring a phone with me. I just never bring a phone into the gym. So it's really disappointing that Fitbit doesn't allow you to actually download and/or stream Spotify, but it does allow you to do that for up to 3 Pandora stations, or they also have an app called Deezer, which I am not at all familiar with. I think it's bigger in Europe potentially, but you can download and play songs there. So if you're a heavy Spotify user, it's not the best watch for that. I know Garmin lets you download and play Spotify songs. I know Samsung lets you do the same. So there's certainly other options out there for it, but the Fitbit Sense is not that one. If you use Pandora or Deezer, looks like you're pretty good to go. Also included is Fitbit Pay, much like Apple Pay or Google Pay, where you just load up credit cards and use your watch to pay for things. It also includes Alexa if you like using voice commands. On the website, it does say it has support for Google Assistant, but at time of launch, that was not available. So when you watch this video, it may or may not be available now, but it was not available on launch. And generally, feedback across this entire watch is that things seemed a bit rushed to market, like they were just trying to get something to market as quickly as possible and only doing the minimum features required to make that happen. And I think Google Assistant was one of the casualties along the way. So a bit of a disappointment there, but you can decide how much that matters to you. Past that, you can make calls and text over Bluetooth, as well as receive notifications, of course. This does not have an LTE option, so you will need a phone nearby. And it also displays weather, which is a super basic feature, but if you want to check weather on your watch, it definitely has that. Now to the area where I think most people are probably most curious about when it comes to any Fitbit device, which is health as well as fitness features. I will say, everything I'll be showing is from the premium version of the app. Basically, Fitbit's app is where all the information is displayed. They do have a desktop website, but it kind of stinks. So we'll be using the app. And the premium version is shown as I did not have the regular version activated at the time of recording this, but you do get 6 months free when you buy the Sense. So you can at least check it out and decide if a $9.99 a month fee is worth it to you, or I think it's $80 a year annually if you prefer to pay that way. I will say across basically every single feature that we will check out in the health and wellness section of this, it seems like Fitbit is a company that loves to present you with information but doesn't love to tell you how to interpret or use that information. I think they're super cautious because they don't want to be labeled as a medical device or be shown as giving medical advice, but ultimately that lowers the value that at least I get from the information it presents, so let's just talk through that. So first up is stress management, which is designed to show essentially how well you're managing stress and how likely you are to be dealing with stress in a given day. I think it's a really cool concept of a feature, but in about the 2 weeks that I owned this watch, it worked 1 day out of 2 weeks. So that's not really great. And I work in technology. I research technology for my full-time job. If I have no idea why that's happening, I'm sure there's lots of other people that had the same problem. So I actually did some quick Google searches to see if that was the case, and a bunch of people are also not getting those metrics. So I'm sure that'll be fixed at some point in time. It seems like a pretty easy software fix once they figure out the root cause, but at the time of this video, that is a problem. The way I think it's meant to work is the watch uses your HRV or heart rate variability, as well as the amount of time that you're getting to sleep, and then past that, your exercise and duration of exercise to try to generate a general formula of how well you are coping with stress. Basically, HRV can be used to measure how your body's reacting to stress, especially if HRV dips suddenly. It might be a sign that you're getting sick or you're just not healthy or very stressed. So HRV is one metric, and then of course, sleep as well as exercise both help improve or reduce stress. So it generates a score based on those data points and presents them to you over time, so you can decide how well you're managing stress and perhaps make some lifestyle changes to sleep more or exercise a bit more to better cope with it. Another new feature is skin temperature. So while you're sleeping, the Fitbit measures your skin temperature, just where the Fitbit rests on your wrist, and then it generates a baseline skin temperature over a couple of days, and then eventually tells you if while you're sleeping, your skin temperature is higher or lower than the baseline. Fitbit doesn't give you a ton of information in terms of how to interpret this outside of saying changes can be meaningful. So I'd say if you have significant changes in your skin temperature, maybe talk to a doctor. But this is definitely one of those things where it's like, hey, this is kind of neat that you measure this, but I have no idea how to use it. And that really just makes it kind of a non-important feature to me. The app also has a mindfulness section, so it both tracks your mindfulness sections over time so you can see if you're meditating on a consistent basis. And then in the premium version of the app, it includes guided meditation sessions. So if that's something you're looking for, that adds a lot of value to the $10 a month premium feature. But if you already have a mindfulness app like Calm or Headspace or Waking Up, then you might not be so tempted to switch to a new service, especially if you really like the instructors on your app, which is an important thing. So you can decide and weigh those to see if that's an important thing to you. I haven't personally tried those as I use the Waking Up app, but you can certainly test them out for free, see if you like the instructors, and if so, that's a pretty big value add. And one of the areas where Fitbit tends to excel as a health tracker is the sleep section. So not only does it measure the amount of time or duration that you're asleep, and I've personally found that to actually be very accurate, at least most of the time, but it also includes things like sleep stages, so deep sleep, REM sleep, as well as light sleep, and then beyond that, it tells you what percentage of your total sleep time you are actually awake as opposed to being asleep. So I find that to be interesting information, but do keep in mind this is not a polysomnogram, it's not a medical device. So at best, these are super, super rough estimates, and I've stressed myself out worrying about how much time I spend in deep sleep, for example. And I ultimately think that might not be super healthy. I know the Apple Watch decided not to include those metrics because they learned with their employees that were testing the device, they essentially stressed out a bunch when they were thinking about how well they were sleeping, so much so that it actually made their sleep quality go down. So they opted just not to show that data, and I actually think more and more that might be a smart move, but as a person who's hungry for more information at all times, Fitbit definitely provides that. Just take it with a grain of salt. And when it comes to exercise, I think this is an area that Fitbit does super well. They give you a wealth of information, and also within the Sense, you get GPS tracking. So if you love to cycle or run or any other type of sport that has you moving around a lot, especially outside, this will let you track distance. It'll show you the map of where you're running. So I do think that's a really cool feature. When you exercise in the gym, you can select what exercise you're doing, and it will track all of that over time in the app, as well as displaying things like what heart rate zone you were in, how long you worked out, and also just giving you a total amount of time that you're in different active zones throughout the day. So I think all those features are great. Fitbit does an excellent job of presenting you with that information. The app is very clean. It's easy to understand. I think overall the app experience from Fitbit is one of the best parts of owning a Fitbit outside of the health metrics section, which we'll talk about next, that felt a little bit rushed. But that being said, one of the primary reasons why I returned my Fitbit Sense was actually the accuracy of the heart rate tracking. So I'll say up front, when you choose to use an optical heart rate tracker like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, as opposed to an electrode-based heart rate tracker like a Polar H10 chest strap, you are basically sacrificing convenience for quality of data. But that being said, I do have an expectation that while working out, it's at least relatively close to reality. So if I check my wrist and look at my heart rate, I can try to adjust what I'm doing based on that. My experience with the Sense is that it was really far off. So what I did is I wore a Sense as well as a Polar H10 tracker, which is a chest strap tracker at the same time, and I ran them at the same time. And I'll say up front, the Polar H10 heart rate tracker is considered essentially a gold standard for accuracy. It's about as good as it's going to get from a consumer grade product. They're $80. I will link it in the description. But when it comes to deciding which one of these two is more accurate, it's no question. It's the Polar H10. It's right next to the heart. It's using electrodes as opposed to an optical sensor. So I have some really rough Photoshop jobs, essentially just comparing the graphs on top of each other. So excuse the messiness, but it should give you the general idea of what I'm talking about here. So on this first test, this is the Fitbit Sense against the Polar H10 heart rate tracker. And the hot pink line is the Polar H10, so consider that the accurate version. And the somewhat pixelated, multicolored line that's a bit stretched out is from the Fitbit Sense. I essentially just stretched these graphs to make sure the times and overall scale was pretty darn close. It's definitely not perfect, but it gives you a good idea. So when it comes to this one, I don't think this one was terrible. It at least somewhat reflects reality most of the time, although some of these peaks where it's different can be up to 20 beats per minute different, which is actually very, very significant when you're doing something like interval training or even just reviewing the amount of time you spent in different exercise zones. This would definitely skew that data, but at least the overall appearance seems to reflect the same ups and downs. So not terrible, not great. This is acceptable to me. Where it gets a bit more dicey is on the second test, where this is actually when I saw this, I decided to return the Sense because I couldn't trust the data it was presenting me in the slightest. And I actually remember doing this workout, and especially in this early zone where it was telling me my heart rate was in and around 90 beats per minute, I remember thinking I was working pretty hard, but actually my Fitbit was saying I was essentially doing like a light walk, which didn't make sense for the workout. And comparing that to the Polar H10, it's not even on the same planet. So I have no idea what was going on here or why this data was so incredibly skewed. But in this case, the Fitbit Sense was not reflecting reality. It provided no benefit to me during the workout, and even in long-term data that it provides based on workouts like this, if I think that's going to be significantly off, it just makes me not want to own this particular watch. I will say it's very possible this was just a weird occurrence and an outlier. It's also extraordinarily possible that Fitbit will do firmware updates as well as software updates to improve these measurements in the future. So I would expect that to happen, but a huge red flag for me and a major consideration. Beyond that, I did run a couple tests with my new Charge 4 as well. So on this one, it's relatively reflecting reality. There are some weird dips where it essentially is inverse of what I was seeing on my Polar H10. I have no idea why that would happen, but wrist trackers are very sensitive to movement. They're very sensitive to the position that it's in. So maybe things got misaligned. Just one of those things you have to worry about when you are wearing an optical tracker. And the second test I ran for the Charge is what I'd say is absolutely perfect for an optical tracker. Some really funky stuff going on early on. I know this big dip right here is where I took off my heart rate tracker to do some wrist wraps, but overall, extremely accurate. This is the kind of general mirroring that I am expecting to see from an optical tracker. Not perfect, but very closely reflecting reality. And in many cases, it's actually right on top of each other. So generally quite impressive there. I don't know what was going on with the Sense and why it was so far off on this second one, but I do think it's important to call that out so you can decide if that's a gamble that you're willing to take or not. And now on to the health metrics section, which is actually a premium feature. So I'll say the most disappointing part with this particular section is you can't click on individual data points to see the actual number. You just have to do your best to reference what that number is based on its point on the overall chart. So that feels really rushed and not fully thought through to me. There's other sections in the Fitbit app where you can click on individual points and get the actual numerical value. So I wish that was the case here, but it's not. So do keep that in mind as you check these out. So going pretty quickly over what it offers, it has breathing rate, which just tracks your breathing rate while sleeping over time. It doesn't tell you a bunch about how to use it, but it does say increases or decreases could be significant. So it's one of those things, if I notice something crazy, I'd talk to my doctor and be like, hey, my Fitbit told me this. Should I be concerned or not? But kind of a moot point feature to me, not something I care too much about personally. You can decide if it matters to you. It also includes heart rate variability. So I will say this is such a cool feature, but the fact is you should not be using an optical tracker to do HRV. The data I got from my Fitbit was not just off, but 20 to 30% off most of the time. It was significantly wrong in a way that also contributed to me returning the device. So I have a small comparison here comparing the data from my Fitbit Sense to a Polar H10 chest strap using the app Elite HRV, which is a fantastic app and it's totally free. So if you pay $80 for a Polar H10 chest strap, get that app for free. You can get an amazingly accurate HRV reading. And the app does what I wish the Fitbit app did actually, because it not only shows you your HRV score, but gives you a readiness score, which helps you interpret how is your HRV impacting your ability to essentially work out or even have a very active day. And it lets you know like, hey, this is a day where you should push yourself, or hey, it looks like you have some issues, like you might be getting sick or you just need a lot of rest. So take it easy or even don't work out on this day. So those little pieces of information that help me make intelligent decisions based on the data it's presenting me are something I deeply wish that Fitbit included in their app, and I do hope they will consider doing so in the future. But when it comes to the individual data points here, it seems like it averages out, generally speaking, that my Sense showed my HRV as being about 18 points lower than reality on a very consistent basis. So the ups and the downs, which is a very important signal with HRV, if your HRV dips significantly, for example, it's a sign that you should take it easy. Those seem to be fairly accurate when you compare these two things to each other, but the core scores is way off. It's incredibly far off, where I was actually concerned that my HRV score seemed really low for someone my age and general fitness level. So that's when I have to wonder, if you are building a device that presents you these pieces of information, but those pieces of information are just so far off that they don't really reflect reality, is that a feature you should be including at this particular point in the development of that product? I would generally say probably not. I don't think it's great to give people things that they can interpret as medical advice or medical information. Even though Fitbit explicitly says this is not a medical device, I do think they still have some responsibility to be really thoughtful and careful about what they're showing people. So this data is super far off on the Fitbit Sense. If you want to track it accurately, get a Polar H10 or another device designed specifically to measure HRV. Get the Elite HRV app and just do that. The Elite HRV app won't even let you use any optical sensor because they say they're just not good enough to give you real, accurate information. A few other things here pretty quickly. It does have an oxygen sensor or a blood O2 monitor. So it essentially tells you how much oxygen is in your blood. If you go to the doctor's office, they usually stick something on your finger that tells you that in a few seconds. The difference here is you need to have a specific watch face on the Sense at the time when you want to get the reading, and then you actually have to sleep with that watch face on. So it takes 6 to 8 hours essentially to get your blood O2 information. Compare that to an Apple Watch where it takes 15 seconds. Fitbit said they did this because it is more accurate, but I can't imagine people that are concerned about their blood O2 levels would want to wait an entire night to get the overall information. So it's one of those like, hey, it's an interesting feature, but I think the actual execution of this is super funky in this case. And if you want that core information, get a blood O2 sensor or get a different device that can read it faster. This idea just feels a bit rushed to me. Past that, the Fitbit Sense does offer resting heart rate, which I think is actually one of the more useful metrics that you can use. A low resting heart rate can be a sign of good cardiovascular health, and if it starts rising rapidly or lowering rapidly, it can be a sign that there might be some problems and you should probably talk to a doctor. So that information is here. I've had really good experiences with that information being accurate on the Sense, that information being accurate on the Charge, because optical sensors are pretty darn good at normal day-to-day life heart rate monitoring. It's just the more extreme exercise stuff where they tend to freak out a bit. So in this case, I think that's a really solid piece of data to use. Past that, the Sense has all the typical features you'd expect, like movement reminders telling you to take however many steps you tell it to tell you to take in a given time period. It also, of course, tracks your steps over time. It also does things like track the amount of calories, or at least estimated amount of calories that you're burning in a day. If you input your weight, it'll track your weight over time. You can also pair it with a smart scale to automatically bring your weight information into the app and track that over time. Beyond that, a couple more specialized features. One is an EDA scan. So essentially on your Fitbit Sense, you put your hand or your palm of your hand over the watch face and make sure your palm of your hand is touching the metal. And then the Sense will essentially have you time yourself for a couple minutes while you meditate, and it will look for electrodermal activity. And electrodermal activity is apparently a sign of stress. So if you track that over time, you can perhaps see if you are more stressed or not. I think this is one of those interesting features. I don't totally know how to apply it to myself, but if you want another way of attempting to see if you're managing stress or coping with stress better over time, that's certainly a way of doing it. Past that, a highly specific thing that is being touted as a big feature is an ECG or electrocardiogram scan. And essentially it's checking for atrial fibrillation, which is heart rhythm irregularity. So this is certainly not a medical device, and if you have serious heart problems, I would urge you to not use a Fitbit to check this, but it will at least give you a sense if your heart rhythm is where it should be, or if there's something that you should perhaps go in and see a doctor. But I would say of any feature on this particular watch, take this one with a grain of salt. I don't know how accurate this is. I don't have a good way of testing that myself, but serious health issues, at least in my opinion, require something a bit more than just a smartwatch. So be mindful of that. If this feature is super important to you, talk to your doctor and get their opinion and trust whatever they say over mine 1,000,000%. Beyond that, the Fitbit Sense also offers menstrual health tracking. So if that's important to you, I've been told that aspect of the app is excellent and a very valuable feature. So in terms of final considerations when it comes to this watch, I do think the app is excellent overall, although sometimes it feels a bit unfinished. And I really thought the design and overall functionality, especially the intuitive nature of using the interface on the watch, were all handled excellently. I just think the accuracy problems, whether it is the heart rate while working out or the HRV numbers just being completely not even in the realm of reality, really took away from this watch for me. And it made me feel like they really rushed this product to market when they should have taken some more time in development, refined things, really refined aspects of the app, made sure that the accuracy of all the tracking information was as good as it could be from an optical sensor before pushing this live. I know at least at the time of this recording, Google is considering acquiring Fitbit, and I can't help but wonder if they wanted a new flagship smartwatch in the market to generate some sales to help appetize Google's desire to buy them out. Obviously can't say that for sure, but I did have higher expectations for this watch, especially at a $300 plus price point than the ultimate product that I received. Of course, that being said, a lot of these problems could be fixed by firmware updates, they could be fixed by software updates, and I would absolutely expect Fitbit to make those. And if Google does ever acquire Fitbit, I'd expect exceptional improvements across both the hardware as well as the software. So that's something to look out for should that ever happen. It'd be a big, big boost to Fitbit's offering almost without a question. And of course, the core things to consider when you're trying to think like, should I buy this watch or not, even after watching this entire video, are the accuracy of heart rate monitoring while working out, where I'd say if you care a lot about getting the most accurate data possible, get yourself a Polar H10 chest strap. And then if you want a watch that can actually show you the chest strap's data on the watch face, I know Polar's watches do that. I'm pretty sure the Samsung watches do that. The Fitbit Sense does not. So just be mindful of that depending on what matters to you. Or of course, you can just use Polar's app on your phone and look at your phone while working out to see your heart rate or how you're progressing through your workout. And then of course, the HRV accuracy being way off was a big deal to me. But if that's not important to you, then it's more of a moot point. But that is really it for this video. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I do hope it was helpful. If this video was helpful, feel free to hit the thumbs up button to let me know. And of course, if you have questions or comments, leave those in the comments section below. And should you want to watch more videos like this in the future, please consider subscribing. I'll do my best to keep creating new content just like this. But that's it for this video. Thanks again for watching.